A Sunday morning deep in the heart of Aspen, Colorado. Snow falling so quietly you could hear your own heartbeat. Charlotte Hayes had dated 27 men in 2 years, and every single time she had shown up as someone else entirely. No town car waiting at the curb, no security detail hovering at a respectful distance, no reservation under her real name. Just a woman in a second-hand coat and sensible boots, going by Charlie, nursing a cheap cup of coffee across from someone she had never met and would likely never see again. Some of those men walked out when they realized she couldn't split the check. Some stayed, but only long enough to borrow money she didn't seem to have. She stopped counting the ways a person could disappoint you. Then came the 28th name on the list. Daniel Brooks, 36 years old, auto mechanic, single father. He showed up late because he had to drop his daughter at her Saturday reading program. He apologized without making it into a story about himself. He ordered the Tuesday meatloaf special even though it was Sunday, because the diner didn't turn the menu board around and he didn't want to embarrass the waitress by pointing it out. He paid the bill before Charlotte could finish pretending to look for her wallet. Then, at 8 o'clock exactly, he excused himself to step outside and call his daughter good night. Charlotte watched him through the snow-fogged glass, this unremarkable man in a worn canvas jacket, his breath making small clouds in the cold air, his voice dropping into something so tender it was almost hard to witness from the other side of the window. She didn't know it yet, standing there with her coffee going cold. But the test she had built so carefully over 2 years, it hadn't been for any of those 28 men. It had been for herself. Charlotte Hayes had made her first million at 26 by selling a logistics algorithm she had written in a studio apartment on the edge of Denver, surviving on instant oatmeal and the particular stubbornness of someone with nothing to lose. By 31, she had built Hayes Tech into one of the fastest-growing enterprise software companies in the Mountain West. By 34, she was on the cover of 3 business magazines and had stopped reading any of them. The money had arrived so gradually, and then so suddenly, that she hadn't quite adjusted to what it meant. It meant people watched how she moved through a room. It meant invitations to things she didn't want to attend. It meant a certain kind of man appeared at industry dinners and fundraising galas, men who angled themselves into her orbit with the practiced ease of people who had always understood that wealth was something you maneuvered toward. She had been engaged once, at 29, to a venture capitalist named Preston, who had seemed, at first, genuinely interested in her in the way she thought through problems, in the particular satisfaction she took from building something functional and durable. It took her 14 months to understand that what he was actually interested in was the equity stake a marriage would give him. He hadn't been cruel about it. He had simply been efficient. She ended the engagement on a Tuesday evening in March and did not cry about it until she was in the parking garage, alone, and even then she stopped after a few minutes because she had an 8 o'clock call with Singapore the next morning. After Preston, she became careful. After careful, she became strategic. The blind dates had started as a kind of experiment. A friend, meaning well, had set her up with a man who turned out to have Googled her name before the appetizers arrived. Charlotte had watched him recalibrate in real time, the way his posture changed, the way his questions shifted from genuine curiosity to something that felt like due diligence. She had ended the evening early and driven home with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been studied rather than seen. 2 weeks later, on an impulse she couldn't fully explain, she showed up to another setup in a borrowed coat and gave her middle name. The man had been perfectly pleasant. He had also, very gently, suggested that she might want to look into a particular investment opportunity he was managing. When she said she didn't really have extra capital at the moment, something had shifted behind his eyes. Not disapproval, just a quiet recalculation, like a GPS rerouting. She drove home that night thinking, what if none of them ever knew? So she built the test. No, she built a version of herself. Charlie, a woman who worked at a mid-sized insurance company in a role that didn't require much explanation at dinner parties. A woman who took the bus because her car was in the shop, always. A woman who lived modestly, thought carefully about the check, and had no particular ambitions beyond next month's rent. 27 men in 2 years. Charlotte had catalogued their failures the way a scientist catalogues data, without malice and without hope. A man who had suggested, on date 3, that she might consider a different job if she wanted financial stability. A man who had borrowed $40 for a parking ticket and never mentioned it again. A man who had seemed genuinely fond of her until she mentioned that Charlie's company was downsizing, at which point he had developed a pressing schedule conflict that lasted indefinitely. The data was clean and consistent and completely depressing. She had not gone looking for Daniel Brooks. A mutual acquaintance, her mechanic's wife, of all people, who knew a woman who went to church with his aunt, had made the introduction with no particular fanfare. He was a good man, the woman said. He had a little girl. He had been through something hard and come out of it quieter but not bitter. Charlotte had almost canceled 3 times. She showed up anyway, in the second-hand coat, and sat down across from a man who was already apologizing for the parking situation. The diner was called Peakside Grill, and it had been in the same location on Aspen's eastern edge for 30 years without renovating once, which Charlotte privately respected. The booths were turquoise vinyl. The coffee came in a brown ceramic mug with a small chip on the handle. The menu was laminated and sticky in the upper left corner, a detail that suggested the establishment had priorities other than appearances. Daniel was 4 minutes late. He texted before he arrived, which she had not expected. Running a few minutes behind, sorry, had to sort out the reading program drop-off. See you shortly. He came in looking like someone who had hurried without being rushed, a distinction she noticed and filed away. His jacket was canvas, faded at the elbows, the kind of thing you wore because it worked and not because it said anything. His boots were clean but not new. He had the hands of someone who used them for a living. Calloused, competent, slightly raw from the cold. "I'm Daniel," he said, which was unnecessary because she had been waiting for him for 4 minutes. But she appreciated that he didn't lead with an apology that would require her to reassure him. "Charlie," she said. "Thanks for coming." They sat. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with the efficient warmth of someone who had seen every kind of first date, appeared with menus and coffee without being asked. Daniel thanked her by name. He had clearly been here before. Charlotte studied him the way she studied everything, methodically, without being obvious about it. He didn't check his phone. He didn't scan the room. He looked at her with the quiet attention of someone who found people genuinely interesting rather than strategically useful, which was rarer than most people understood. "Your friend said you work in insurance," he said. "Claims processing," Charlotte said, deploying the cover story she had refined over 2 years of these evenings. "It's mostly numbers and phone calls. Not very interesting." "I don't know about that," Daniel said. "People call you on some of the worst days of their lives. That seems like it matters." She had not expected that. Most people nodded politely at the insurance answer and moved on to something they found more interesting. She set down her coffee cup. "What do you do?" she asked, though she already knew. "Mechanic. I run a small shop, mostly domestic vehicles, some older imports. We do good work." He said it without false modesty or the exaggerated humility people used to seem relatable. It was simply a true statement. They did good work. The conversation moved the way good conversations did, without a visible agenda. They talked about the particular quality of snow in Aspen versus Denver, a distinction that sounded like nothing until you tried to explain it and found you actually had opinions. They talked about books they had read as children, which led to an argument, good-natured and specific, about whether choose-your-own-adventure novels counted as literature or as something else entirely. They talked about the difficulty of finding a good breakfast burrito in a town that charged $18 for avocado toast. Charlotte noticed that he did not ask what part of town she lived in. He did not ask about her car, her vacation plans, her investment strategy. He did not try to impress her with anything. He simply talked to her, and listened when she talked back, in the way of a person who had enough going on inside their own head that they didn't need to perform. When the bill came, Charlotte reached for her purse with the practiced slowness of someone about to discover they've left their card at home. She had used this moment 27 times. It was her instrument. Daniel had already handed the waitress his card. "You didn't have to do that," Charlotte said. "It's Sunday," he said, as though that explained it. Then, seeing her expression, "My daughter has this theory that Sunday hospitality is a whole separate category from regular hospitality. I think she picked it up from my mother. Anyway," he smiled, slightly embarrassed by the tangent. "You can get the coffee next time, if you want, next time." He said it easily, without weight, the way you said it when you actually meant it rather than as a social formality. Charlotte found herself doing something she had not done in a long time on one of these evenings. She relaxed. She saw his face change before he reached for the phone. It was the kind of change you only caught if you were watching carefully, a small softening around the eyes, a shift in his attention that moved from her to somewhere else entirely, somewhere that mattered to him more than wherever he was at the moment. He glanced at the clock on the wall above the counter. "Would you mind if I stepped out for a few minutes?" he said. "I need to make a call." "Of course," Charlotte said. He went outside. Through the steamed glass of the diner's front window, she watched him, without meaning, to the way you watch something you hadn't planned to look at. The snow was still falling, fine and steady. He stood on the sidewalk with his collar turned up and his phone against his ear. And even through the glass and the distance and the winter between them, she could see what the call was doing to him. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. The whole shape of him changed, not smaller, but softer, the way a hand opens when it stops gripping something. He was in there for 5 minutes. When he came back, he slid into the booth with a slightly sheepish expression. "My daughter," he said. "She's 6. We have a rule about the goodnight call." "That's a good rule," Charlotte said. "Her name is Lily. She's—" He stopped, smiled. "I'm biased, obviously. But she's remarkable. She's been reading chapter books since last spring. She tells me about them at dinner in enormous detail, and I think she suspects that I haven't actually read them myself. Have you? Some of them, when she's asleep." He picked up his coffee. Her mother passed away when Lily was 2. "So it's just the 2 of us, which means, the good night call is non-negotiable. Whatever I'm doing." He said it the way people said things they had already made peace with, not heavily, not performing grief, just as a fact that was part of his life the way the weather was part of his life, something you accounted for without resenting. Charlotte thought about her own evenings, the penthouse overlooking the city, the way she worked until 11 most nights because there was nothing specific drawing her home, the fact that she had a kitchen she barely used, and a guest bedroom that had never had a guest in it. The particular silence of a large space occupied by one person. "What does she think?" Charlotte asked. "About you going on dates?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, not offended. "She thinks it's funny," she said, and I quote, "Don't talk too much, Dad, because then people think you don't listen. 6 years old." He shook his head. "So I've been trying to listen more. How's that going?" "You tell me," he said. Charlotte looked at him across the turquoise table, in the warm and sticky light of the diner that had never renovated, with the snow coming down outside the window, and thought, "This is the most honest I have felt in 2 years." She did not say that, but she thought it. The weeks that followed were unlike anything in Charlotte's recent history, which was to say, they were quiet, and she had not understood until now how much she needed quiet. She and Daniel met on Sundays, because that was when his shop was closed and Lily's reading program ran long enough for 2 adults to have a breakfast that didn't need to be rushed. The diner became theirs by default. They never discussed it. They simply kept showing up there. The waitress, whose name was Deanna, eventually stopped leaving menus. They were careful with each other. Not cautious in the way of people hiding things, but careful in the way of people who had both been careless before and were trying a different speed. He never pushed her for details she didn't volunteer. She learned not to ask questions whose answers would require her to answer in kind. She met Lily on the fourth Sunday. The child had her father's eyes and the general energy of someone who had decided to be interested in everything and was running low on time. She had an opinion about every item on the menu. She had a stuffed rabbit named Gerald who came everywhere and had his own set of opinions, which Lily translated without embarrassment. She looked at Charlotte with the particular directness of small children, who have not yet learned to dilute their observations with social politeness, and said, "You smell like the fancy soap at the hotel." "I like nice soap," Charlotte said, which was entirely true and absolutely insufficient. Lily nodded as though this satisfied her and picked up her hot chocolate. After that, Lily was simply there, on the Sundays, when her reading program let out early. She and Charlotte developed a separate relationship from the one Charlotte had with Daniel, less cautious, more immediate. Lily wanted to know if Charlotte liked dinosaurs. Yes, specifically ankylosaurs. Whether Charlie thought dogs were smarter than cats, unclear, data inconclusive, and whether Charlotte had ever been to the ocean. Yes, many times, which disappointed Lily because she had never been and wanted Charlotte to have the same longing she did, so they could share it. Charlotte found herself thinking about Lily during the week in the same way she thought about a problem she was working on, not anxiously, but persistently, as though her mind had opened a file and not finished with it. On a Wednesday afternoon in November, she walked through the frosted glass doors of a bookstore on Mill Street and spent 45 minutes finding the next 2 books in the series Lily was currently devouring. She stood in line with them, tucked under her arm, and thought, when did this happen? She knew when. 8 o'clock on a Sunday, through a fogged diner window, watching a man tell his daughter good night. The problem, and Charlotte was experienced enough to know it was a problem, was that Charlie had no books to give. Charlotte Hayes, whose personal library occupied an entire room in her penthouse, and whose assistant had a standing order with 3 different booksellers, could give Lily any book in print. But Charlie, the woman Daniel believed he was building something with, bought claims forms for a living and thought carefully before splitting a check. She was running out of room inside the lie. What she had not understood when she designed Charlie was that the character required constant maintenance. Every small truth she accidentally revealed had to be walked back. Every genuine reflex, the way she assessed a problem, the speed at which she navigated bureaucratic systems, the particular fluency she had with how large organizations made decisions, had to be covered or explained or quietly abandoned. It was exhausting in a way that was distinct from the exhaustion of running a company, because at least the exhaustion of the company left something behind at the end of the day. This exhaustion left only the feeling of having worked very hard at something that made her smaller. She bought Lily the books on a Wednesday. She kept them in the back seat of her car for 3 days. On Saturday morning, she left them in a paper bag outside Daniel's apartment door with a card that said only, "For the next 3 chapters, see." She made the mistake in November, on a Thursday that had bled without warning into a crisis. The product launch had gone sideways in the final hour, a compatibility issue with a major client's legacy system, the kind of thing that didn't become visible until everything was live, and 40,000 users were staring at a loading screen that didn't resolve. Charlotte had spent 8 hours on back-to-back calls, first with her CTO, then with the client's IT team, then with her own engineers, who eventually found the issue in a nested data handling function that should have been caught in QA and would be the subject of a thorough and unpleasant retrospective. The crisis resolved at 6 in the evening. Charlotte walked out of her office building into the cold air wearing the clothes she had put on at 6 in the morning. A charcoal wool blazer over a silk blouse, the kind of outfit that signaled CEO without announcing it, and on her left wrist, a watch she had received as a gift 3 years ago from a vendor who had clearly researched what she would appreciate. It was not flashy. It was not costume. It was simply the kind of watch a person wore when money was genuinely not a constraint. She met Daniel for dinner. They had started doing weeknight dinners occasionally. In addition to the Sunday ritual, at a small Italian place that was dark and warm and unpretentious. She sat down across from him and did not think about the watch until she reached for the breadbasket, and his eyes dropped to her wrist for half a second too long. He didn't say anything, but Charlotte felt the shift in the air the way you feel a pressure change before a storm. Subtle, atmospheric, unmistakable. She rolled her sleeve down. Too late. Over the following days, she noticed him noticing. The way she sometimes spoke about supply chains with a fluency that didn't belong to a claims processor. The way the front desk staff at a restaurant they visited had looked at her with a certain recognition that she covered quickly. The way she had, on one occasion, answered a question about a software acquisition by name before catching herself and redirecting. Daniel was not a suspicious person. He was, in Charlotte's careful observation of him, someone who gave people the full benefit of the full doubt. But he was not careless, and he was not naive. And he had the particular acuity of someone who had spent years diagnosing problems in machines that couldn't tell you what was wrong. A patience with silence, and attention to what wasn't being said. Charlotte knew the window was closing. She just wasn't ready. Not because she didn't trust him. She trusted him more than anyone she had met in years. That was precisely the problem. The truth, once it arrived, would come with a reckoning. Not just the deception, but what the deception said about her, what it revealed about what she had thought she needed, and what it suggested about how little faith she had carried into the room on that first Sunday. She was afraid that the truth would turn him into someone who looked at her differently. She was afraid it wouldn't change anything about how she felt about him, and that this would be worse. The reporters were there because of an acquisition. Hayes Tech had finalized the purchase of a smaller AI firm the previous afternoon, the kind of transaction that didn't make national news but was significant enough in the regional tech press that someone had tipped off a local journalist who had shown up outside the building too late and had apparently been following the signal ever since. It was a Saturday afternoon in early December, cold enough that the air hurt to breathe, and Charlotte and Daniel were walking along a street of closed storefronts and Christmas lights when she heard her name, her real name, called from 40 feet away. Charlotte Hayes. She stopped. Daniel stopped. The journalist, young, in a bright yellow parka, holding his phone up already, was covering the distance between them. A second person materialized from a coffee shop doorway, camera up. Charlotte had dealt with press 100 times. She knew how to stand, what to say, which way to turn. What she did not know was how to stand next to Daniel while it happened. "Miss Hayes, can you comment on the Terralogic acquisition? The reported price is significantly above market. I'm not doing media today," she said, in the voice she used for media, which was calm and final. "Contact my press office on Monday." The journalist turned to Daniel with the reflexive hope of someone looking for an alternate angle. Are you two together? Is this... Have a good afternoon," Charlotte said, and steered past him. They walked half a block in silence. The snow had started again, light flecks that settled on Daniel's shoulders and melted immediately. He stopped at the corner under a streetlight that was already glowing in the early dark winter afternoon. She watched him take out his phone. She knew what he was doing. She stood still while he looked at it, at the results of her name, at the photographs, at the number that followed the word net worth in the summary that any search engine would return in seconds. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at her. "Charlotte," he said, "not Charlie." "Daniel." "How long?" She did not pretend to misunderstand. From the beginning, he nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was processing something that didn't fit into existing categories. She had watched him do it before, with a problem on an engine that was behaving unexpectedly. It meant he was working through something rather than reacting to it. "Why?" he said. She told him the truth, the quick version, the version that left out the fullness of what she felt, and stuck to the facts because she did not trust herself with the fullness right now. The men before him, the test, the coat, the name. Daniel listened. When she finished, he said, I wasn't a test. I know that, Charlotte said. That's what I got wrong. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she could not read it. Then he turned and walked away down the street, into the snow. Without looking back, he did not stop answering her messages. That was the first thing she noticed, the absence of absence. He replied, briefly, when she texted. He responded to questions directly. He was not cold, exactly, but he was no longer warm, and the difference between those two temperatures was everything. The Sunday diner visits stopped by mutual silence. She didn't suggest it, he didn't either. The gap sat between them like weather. What she had not anticipated was Lily. The child had apparently been told only that Charlotte was busy for a while, which was the kind of explanation adults gave children when they had not yet decided what the truth was. Lily had accepted this with the stoicism of someone who had already lost one person and had developed, young, a quiet philosophy about the unreliability of permanence. She texted Charlotte from Daniel's phone one afternoon. "This is Lily. Gerald says hello. He wants to know if you are coming on Sunday." Charlotte sat in her office on the 42nd floor and read that message 4 times. "I'm not sure," she texted back. "Tell Gerald I said hello." "Gerald says okay, but he is still waiting," Lily replied. Charlotte put her phone face down on the desk and stared at the city below her, which was gray and snow-covered and very far away from a turquoise vinyl booth and a rabbit with opinions. She thought about what Daniel had said, not angrily, not as an accusation, but with the quiet specificity of someone saying a true thing. I wasn't a test. She understood now what she had refused to see while she was constructing the test, refining it, deploying it across 28 evenings. The test had never been about vetting anyone else. It had been a way of staying unreachable while appearing to be available, a mechanism for ensuring that she could always find a reason to withdraw before anything real could happen. She had not been protecting herself from bad men. She had been protecting herself from good ones, from the possibility that a good one might know her fully, real name and real income and real history, and still find something worth staying for, and that she might have to become someone who believed that. The realization arrived without drama. In the quiet of a November afternoon, in an office she had built from nothing, and which currently felt, in the specific way that excessive privacy could feel, exactly like a very elegant trap, she picked up her phone. She did not text Daniel. She sat with it for 2 weeks, the way you sit with something you know you have to do but aren't ready to do, allowing the readiness to build. She thought about what readiness meant. Actually, whether it was a feeling you waited for or a decision you made before the feeling arrived. She had built a company by making decisions before she felt ready for them. She had not applied this insight to anything personal. She was applying it now, retroactively, without particularly enjoying the lesson. She ran a company with 237 employees. She had renegotiated contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. She had fired people who deserved to be fired and defended people who deserved defending, and made the calls that were supposed to be impossible before anyone else at the table had finished their coffee. None of this had prepared her for sitting in a parked car outside a mechanic's shop on a Tuesday afternoon, watching through the chain-link fence, as Daniel worked on something under a raised hood with the unhurried focus of someone who trusted his own hands completely, wondering if the word sorry was sufficient for what she had done and suspecting it wasn't, but knowing she would have to begin there anyway. She did not go in. She drove back to the penthouse and ordered takeout and ate it at her kitchen island, under the lights that she had chosen, because they looked warm but weren't actually warm, which felt, this particular evening, like an apt description of the life she had been building when she was not careful. Then Lily disappeared. The call came at 7:40 on a Tuesday evening. It was Daniel's number, but the voice was not Daniel, it was Deanna, from the diner. Which meant that Daniel's hands were busy with something else, and he had given someone his phone, which meant things were not orderly. "She's not in the apartment," Deanna said. "He can't find her. The police are coming." I thought you should know." Charlotte was already on her feet. She had a standing Thursday dinner with her COO that she would cancel by text on the elevator. She had a car waiting downstairs that she had never explained to Daniel because Charlie took the bus. She was in the back seat in 40 seconds, telling the driver to go. She knew Lily's habits. The way you came to know a child you had spent careful Sunday mornings with over 3 months. Where she looked. What she moved toward. What she loved. The girl was drawn to water even in winter. She had a particular attachment to Heron Park, which had a pond that froze clean and flat in December and which she called, for reasons she had never explained, the Mirror Lake. "That's not a lake," Daniel had told her once. "It's a mirror," Lily said. "When it's frozen, you can see the sky inside it." Charlotte told the driver. Heron Park. The park at night in December was very dark and very cold. The kind of cold that landed on the back of your neck and moved down. She went in through the east gate, the one nearest the pond. Her shoes were wrong for this. She had been in the office and was wearing low heels that compressed the snow sideways with each step. She moved anyway. She found Lily at the far edge of the pond, sitting on the snow with her knees pulled up and her coat buttoned all the way to her chin, looking at the frozen surface. Gerald the rabbit was tucked under one arm. Charlotte sat down next to her in the snow, in the wool blazer and the silk blouse and the wrong shoes, and did not say anything immediately because Lily's face was doing something complicated. After a moment, Lily said, "I heard him talking on the phone. He was sad. I thought if I wasn't there he wouldn't be sad about me anymore." "That's not how that works," Charlotte said gently. "I know," Lily said. "I know that now." Gerald said the same thing. Charlotte opened her coat and put it around both of them, an arm around the child, Lily's small weight against her side, the cold pressing in from all directions. "Your dad is looking for you," she said. "He's not sad because of you. He's sad because of me." Lily looked up at her. "Why are you sad?" "Because I wasn't honest." "And I should have been." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Are you going to fix it?" "I'm going to try." "Okay," Lily said, satisfied, and leaned her head against Charlotte's ribs. Charlotte held the child in the dark and in the cold and waited for the sound of Daniel's footsteps in the snow. He came through the east gate at a run that slowed when the flashlight from his phone found them 2 figures at the edge of the frozen pond, motionless, alive. He crossed the snow in 20 seconds and lifted Lily into his arms without speaking, holding on with the total physical conviction of someone whose hands had been empty for too long. Charlotte watched him check her face, hands, feet with the systematic attention of a person who needed certainty. "I'm fine, Dad," Lily said, in the patient voice of a child who was being thoroughly examined. "Charlie found me, Charlotte," Charlotte said quietly. "My name is Charlotte." Lily looked at her. "Okay," she said, as though this were a small adjustment easily made. "Charlotte found me." Daniel's eyes came up from Lily's face to Charlotte's. He was still breathing fast from the run. His expression was something she couldn't entirely read, relief layered over everything else. Too many things at once. The police arrived 2 minutes later. There was a logistics interval statement, Lily wrapped in a blanket from an emergency kit, a call from Daniel's sister who had been sitting with Lily that evening and was deeply upset with herself. Charlotte handled the peripheral coordination automatically, the way she handled crises, with the calm efficiency of someone who knew what needed doing and did it. It was only afterward, when Lily was in the back of a police vehicle with the heat running, that Charlotte and Daniel were standing alone at the edge of the park with the snow coming down. "I owe you an explanation that's longer than what I gave you on the street," she said. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I mean it. I know you mean it. That's why I want to give it." She talked for 15 minutes, standing in the cold, not performing anything. She told him about Preston, about the first blind date after Preston and what it had taught her, about the logic that had seemed so clean and rational that you could engineer a situation in which only genuine people survived, and what was wrong with that logic, which was that it treated other people as variables in a problem of her own design rather than as people trying to navigate their own unknowns. She told him that she had fallen in love with him in a diner on a Sunday in November, watching him order the wrong special and not correct it, and that nothing about how she felt had any relationship to the test she had constructed or its outcomes. She told him she was sorry. He was quiet for a long time. "I'm not upset about the money," he said finally. "I need you to know that. I'm not someone who has a problem with what someone else has. I know that. I was upset because I thought he started again. I thought we were just being honest with each other. And I was. Every part of it. And I didn't know if you were. Every part of it," Charlotte said. "That was real. All of it." He looked at her. "Then that's what I needed to know," he said. It was January when the snow finally came down, the way winter meant it to, not the light, decorative kind, but the heavy, determined kind that rewrote the landscape overnight and made everything look like something that had always been there. Charlotte drove herself. She had started driving herself more often, which her security team had mixed feelings about and which she had decided was a boundary she was permitted to establish. She drove a car that was not the most expensive car she owned, for reasons she could not entirely explain, except that it felt more honest. She parked on the street outside Daniel's building and sat for a moment with the engine running. She had spent the last 6 weeks doing something she had not done since before Preston, which was allowing herself to want something without first constructing a framework for managing her expectations. It had been uncomfortable. It was still uncomfortable. She was learning that this was probably fine. She got out of the car. The building's front door opened before she reached it. Lily was there in a purple sweater and wool socks, having presumably been watching from the window. "You're here," Lily said, with the tone of someone confirming an important fact. "I'm here," Charlotte said. "Dad made oatmeal," Lily reported. "It has brown sugar." Gerald approved it. Charlotte followed her inside and up one flight of stairs to the apartment, which was small and warm in the way that apartments are warm when someone has made an effort with it over a long time. Good light, too many books for the shelves, a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator, with the unself-conscious abundance of a person who had decided that this was what walls were for. Daniel was in the kitchen. He turned when she came in, and she watched the thing happen in his face that happened when he saw her not performed, not managed. Just the simple and involuntary shift of someone whose day had changed. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. There was a moment between them. Not uncomfortable. More like a breath before a sentence. "Lily set you a place," he said. "Whether you were coming or not?" Charlotte looked at the table. There were 3 places, and Gerald was seated at the 4th chair with a folded napkin tucked into his collar, which suggested a level of domestic integration that Charlotte found, unexpectedly, completely right. She sat down. Lily climbed into her chair and immediately began explaining the specific narrative arc of the chapter book she was currently reading, which involved a girl, a horse, and a series of misunderstandings that were going to resolve. Lily was certain, in the next chapter. Daniel poured coffee. The snow came down outside the kitchen window, heavy and absolute, the kind that didn't ask anything of you, that just fell and kept falling, covering everything equally, without conditions. Charlotte wrapped both hands around the mug and listened to a 6-year-old explain the structural flaws in a fictional character's decision-making. And across the table, Daniel caught her eye and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. There were no tests anymore. There was only this: a small table, a Sunday, the snow outside, and the particular warmth of a place where someone had set a chair out for you before they knew for certain you were coming. Charlotte thought, "I will try to deserve this." And for the first time in a long time, she believed that she could. Spring came late that year, as it always did in Aspen, a slow negotiation between winter and something warmer. Ground still frozen under the first muddy thaw, the mountains holding their white long after the valley had given it up. Lily had graduated to a new chapter book series and reported with great seriousness that this one was harder but better. Gerald had been upgraded to a spot on the bookshelf, which Lily explained was a promotion. Charlotte had told her board the general shape of things, which they received with the equanimity of people who understood that their CEO's private life was not their jurisdiction. Her press office handled the two small items that appeared in business columns with brief and uninteresting statements. She did not move into Daniel's apartment. She thought about it. She decided that wanting to was enough for now, and that enough for now was not the same thing as stopping there. Daniel replaced the timing belt on her car, which she had been meaning to have done for 6 months. He charged her his standard rate. She did not argue. On the first Sunday morning in April, the three of them walked to the farmer's market that materialized along the main street every spring. Lily, ahead of them on the sidewalk in a rain jacket, explaining something at volume to Gerald. Daniel and Charlotte walking side by side with the unhurried pace of people who did not need to make anything happen right now. The air smelled like cold soil and coffee and the beginning of something. Lily had stopped to examine a vegetable she did not recognize, purple and knobby, apparently alarming, and was interrogating the farmer about it with the systematic curiosity of someone who intended to have a thorough understanding of the situation before moving on. The farmer was answering her with complete seriousness. This was the effect Lily had on people. She made them take themselves seriously in the best possible way, by taking them seriously first. Charlotte reached over and took Daniel's hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some things, Charlotte had learned, did not require words. The test had been built on words on cover stories, calibrated answers, the precise management of what you revealed and when. What she found on the other side of the test was that the most important things communicated themselves differently. Through a hand taken on a sidewalk, a place set before anyone knew you were coming, a small voice reporting that Gerald was still waiting. She held his hand and watched Lily interrogate the farmer and thought, "This is what I was looking for. Not the absence of difficulty, not a guarantee of permanence. Just this, to be fully known and to still be here."